888-267-1026. Okay. There's a lot going on in the state of Missouri in terms, and in Illinois in terms of budget cuts and budget deficits. And Governor Jay Nixon has talked about cutting all sorts of programs and tax credits. But no one ever talks about cutting TIFs, tax increment financing. In fact, there's a story out recently that the state and the cities are going to give Walmart, the biggest company in the world, $7 million plus in tax increment financing to move a Walmart 2 miles down the road. Do TIFs actually work? That's a question we've been asking ourselves. And lo and behold comes our guest, who was a political science professor at the University of Missouri St. Louis, Professor Kenneth Thomas. Kenneth, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Great, thanks to be here.
You got it. You recently released a major study on tax increment financing here in the state. It was published, let me get this correct, it was published in the Economic Development Quarterly. You, along with Susan Mason, an associate professor of public policy and administration at Boise State University.
That's right.
Okay, so the two of you got together and asked a simple question, which is, do TIFs actually work?
Yes, we asked the question, well, first of all, we asked the question, who actually uses TIFs?
Okay.
And so we surveyed all the cities above 2,500 population in the state, and then, characterized them by, various demographic and economic characteristics, and worked out the answers to that question.
Okay, first of all, TIFs are not specific only to Missouri. TIFs are used all across the country, correct?
That's right. 49 states in the District of Columbia have TIF legislation.
And a lot of people throw around the word TIF. We all know it means tax increment financing. But quickly, how do you explain it so that people can understand what a TIF is? Right.
Well, a TIF is a subsidy to business that's based on the expected increase in tax revenue when you redevelop a property.
So it's a tax rebate to the person doing the development based on future tax receipts.
Right. As the tax receipts increase from that property, including sales tax in Missouri,
right,
those can then be used to pay for some of the infrastructure, land acquisition, site construction, that sort of thing.
Originally, TIFs were meant to redevelop poor and blighted areas.
That's right. And blight is still the main reason given for TIF.
Right. So who uses it? A lot of blighted areas getting the benefit of tax increment financing?
Well, what we found in our study was that the poorer a city is, the less likely it is to use TIF. So that's one of the main findings of the study. So that goes against, the question is mainly cities with blight, although what you see is that the definition of blight's gotten stretched over time, which is why you can get a result like that.
Right, which is why Chesterfield Valley and the Boone's Crossing out there got a giant TIF. I don't necessarily think that was a blighted area.
No, I would agree with you.
Right, except they got a big fat TIF, and we see what's out there now.
Right.
Okay, so one of your results from your study is that TIFs were originally created to help blighted areas, but that the blighted areas aren't really taking advantage of the TIFs.
That's right, that the poorer areas are not taking advantage.
Why not? Why not?
Well, mainly because the state law doesn't prevent the richer areas from doing it. Certainly some poorer cities do use TIF.
Right.
But it's just that.
If you're a development, would you rather go to a better area or a worse area?
Exactly.
You'd rather go to a better area.
And if you can get a subsidy going to the better area, you're not going to go to the poorer area even with a subsidy.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. So failed in that regard.
Yes.
Did you look at if it actually created wealth and actually created more revenue over the long term?
Well, our study did not directly look at that, but there's an interesting study that East-West Gateway Council of Governments did a year and a half ago, where they looked at TIF in the Metro St. Louis area. And for retail TIF, over the period 1990 to 2007, cities put in $2 billion worth of TIFs for retail. And over that period of time, all of 5,400 jobs were created.
5,000 jobs.
Right. So
new jobs were created.
$370,000 per job.
Right.
So that's not very effective use of the government's money.
No, not very effective use of the government's money. What else did you look at with TIFs?
Well, one of the things we looked at was competitive dynamics, right? Because there wasn't this expected use of TIF by poorer areas. One of the things we examined was well, what if your city is adjacent to another city that uses TIF? Well, it turns out that triples the likelihood that you'll use a TIF. So
okay, so say that. So in other words, two cities fighting for a development.
Right.
One gives the developer a way better deal than the one city. So the developer pits one city against another.
Yes, that's really a common dynamic.
Right. So that the developer really wins out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And the taxpayer doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. And so what were your findings on that again?
We found that if a city adjacent to your city uses TIF, you are then 3 times as likely to use TIF as the city in general.
Right, because if you get a Home Depot, we're going to want a Lowe's.
Exactly.
Right. So, which is why we find a lot of. Is it also true that we also find TIF developments closer to the city's edge and the town's edge?
There's a whole lot of that, yes. I mean, recently, under the Slay administration, the city of St. Louis has gotten pretty active in using TIFs.
Mm-hmm.
There was a long period of time when TIF wasn't used very much in Missouri because it got burned on the St. Louis marketplace development, their first big TIF.
Right.
So they stayed away from TIF for a long time. But under Mayor Slay, they've gotten back into it and have, probably 200 TIFs maybe now. Not real big ones, but a lot of them.
Right. But there are TIFs. There are all sorts of TIFs. It isn't just big box stores that get TIFs. It's all sorts of things.
Right.
And some are actually very, very beneficial. Did you do anything in terms of, all right, what else did we find with the study? Anything else of major significance that you found?
Well, we found, probably not very surprisingly, the larger the city, the more likely it was to use TIF. We cut off our sample at 2,500 population, and even above that level, 56% of cities had used TIF. But if you get up to the top cities, like above 50,000, all of them, except maybe Columbia. I think Columbia's maybe now considering a TIF or has just adopted one, but for a long time they hadn't used one.
Right.
But essentially all the others had.
What about you're talking rural communities too? Have used TIFs or no?
Yes.
They have. Well, now are they getting? Because when you think TIFs, you think Walmart, you think Home Depot, you think Lowe's. Mm-hmm. Are they getting those, or are they getting other TIFs that were more in line with what they originally proposed TIFs to be?
A lot of rural communities, they'll get their Walmart that way because Walmart certainly is very aggressive to seek TIFs.
Sure.
So that's one thing, or they'll set up a gas station or something on the interstate, that kind of thing.
Right. Did you ever ask the question: would these developments have been built without the tax incentive?
No, we had a basic question there, but that's a really important question as far as understanding TIF or other tax incentives at all.
Right.
Right. I mean, like I mentioned before, TIF is a subsidy, which isn't really a dirty word, but politicians and developers really get upset when I say that.
Right.
Hearing.
Right.
So anyway, there's been some studies out there that look at what percentage of jobs would have been created in the absence of whatever particular subsidy of development was given.
Right.
And the studies range from anywhere from 3 to 10% of the jobs were created actually by the subsidy. So
3% to 10% of the jobs were created. So in other words, 90% of those jobs would have been created anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in that particular form, but would have come to the town anyway.